Thank you very much for joining this Zoom meeting of the People's Assembly in Scotland. I understand from information received earlier that other colleagues have declared an interest and they're keen to listen to what primarily we have to say. Obviously, the theme tonight is the position of our care homes and the residents who live in them, and indeed the action or inactions of the politicians. However, colleagues are more than welcome. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Phil McGarry from the RMT, former regional organiser of the union and former president of the STUC in 2008 for my sins. I'm currently the chair of the People's Assembly in Scotland, and for those of you who don't know, we have the majority of trade unions, trade councils and branches all affiliated. And as Keith had mentioned earlier, to those of you who have joined us, if you wish to be kept informed, can I respectfully suggest you forward your email to Keith, our secretary, and he will add your name to our contact list, and you'll be more than welcome. And if you like, perhaps you could go back to your branches and get them to affiliate or your regional committee if they haven't already done so. I just want to remind people that every 2 weeks we have these Zoom meetings, and the last one was to do with the gas and offshore sector. And the reason why I'm repeating it is we had Jake Malloy and John Boland from the committee of the OCG to discuss the massive job losses. But since that matter was conveyed to us by both Jake and John, it appears that motions have been lodged by Richard Leonard, the leader of the Labour Party, on this crisis in the offshore, and lodged also by Lewis MacDonald, who is a MSP and a group member of the RMT parliamentary group. And I understand meetings have been arranged by Paul Wheelhouse, the Energy Minister, and the employers from the gas and offshore sector. However, this week's theme is the crisis in our care homes and the general position of the sector. I mean, let's remind ourselves that in mid-March, some 921 patients were discharged from hospital to free up beds and capacity in the National Health Service. But what's unforgivable, in my view, is that they were not tested, neither was those patients who were discharged or the residents in the care homes. Ongoing statistics still remain in relation to the lack of suitable personal protective equipment, the question of low pay, and the overwork that staff have to endure in the care homes. And I read somewhere that at least a half of the total deaths in Scotland have come from care homes. Now that, in my view, is totally and completely unacceptable. And only today there's some mixed, confusing messages being sent out by the Scottish Government about the residents being isolated in their rooms. And some of the managers in these care homes are making it clear that the residents, some of them suffer from various conditions and they don't understand why they've been put in isolation in their own rooms. You know, they talk about the sector. Well, I'll tell you something. We believe that nothing short of public ownership and control of the care sector should be campaigned for. The question of decent pay for care staff, at least a living wage, if not more. We want to ensure that workers have got a safe working environment, and it's important to use the question of the health and safety and welfare at work, section 44. And of course, some of these care homes are privately owned. We obviously got to argue, you know, for sectorial bargaining and collective trade union rights, and maybe under the umbrella of the National Health Service, because the majority of the care homes is in private hands, and it's obviously privatisation of the highest order, and enough of that is enough. So I don't want to keep prattling on about it, because obviously our speakers will tell you firsthand what's actually going on in the sector. I'm pleased to introduce Deborah Clarke, who is the head of the community UNISON in Scotland, and Sandra Trotter, who is a care worker. Sandra, I've known her a long time. She's a wife of an RMT member, Ian, who is a signalman in Dumfries. So I thought I'd get that in to keep Ian happy. So, Deborah, the floor is yours, and once you're finished, we'll go through maybe with a question and answer session, and we need to conclude our discussion to plan the next session. Mindful that we did agree some 2 to 3 weeks ago to get Phil Taylor, who is an academic at Strathclyde University.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me as well?
Yes.
Okay, so just a very warm welcome to everybody, and thank you for that great introduction. So I'm Deborah Clarke. I'm the head of community for Scotland for the trade union UNISON. And I can't even begin to tell you what we've been trying to deal with over the last 10 to 12 weeks in terms of the care homes in Scotland. So I'm going to try and give you a brief walkthrough of some of the things that we know, and then obviously I'd really welcome a discussion with you guys to see what we can do together to make a difference for the care workers that do, are having to work under these conditions. So I just wanted to explain to you and give you a couple of background figures. So there are currently approximately 40,000 residents living in our care homes in Scotland, of which there are about just over 1,000 care homes. But what really shocked me as I started to delve into this is 75% of those care homes are run by the private sector. 75%, and I just find that quite shocking. And of course, these employers are anti-trade union, and what they have been doing is taking tens of millions of pounds out of the public purse away from Scotland. And if you take the provider HC1, we've traced it back through the Cayman Islands to the Arab Emirates, which is where our public money has gone. So what they are doing is draining money out of the care home system very successfully and unchallenged for a very long time. Now, as a result of that, what's happened is the pandemic was left for private care homes and the providers to manage and care for our most vulnerable citizens during, what was a significant pandemic. So far, 6 out of 10 of every care homes have reported a case. And, the deaths account for almost 50% of the deaths in Scotland. As Phil has already said, most of that seems to stem from trying to clear hospital beds in hospitals and moving people back into care homes untested. Now, we know that from 2016, it was raised that the care home sector would never be able to cope with a pandemic. It was noted then that they didn't have the stockpiles of PPE, they didn't have the staff training on infection control or the clinical guidance that was needed. Nurses and all of that were being cut. So it really is, a recipe for the disaster that has happened. And, what's important for you all to note is it took until the 17th of May for the government to finally intervene and say, right, we need to put clinical intervention into these care homes. We need to make the chief nursing officer and health officers across the health and social care partners responsible for what's happening. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our members in care homes. So these are often very low paid workers. Many strive to get the Scottish living wage but don't always receive it. We have found out that cooks and cleaners are on the national minimum wage and not the Scottish living wage. Staffing has been cut to the absolute minimum, and they rely on agency staff to make up their staffing numbers, which makes life really difficult in the care home, both for the residents and staff, because obviously agency staff come and go, which confuses the residents, and it means that the care staff on the front line are constantly having to retrain new staff as they come in. Over the last probably 10 years, the terms and conditions of these workers, despite being on a national care home contract funded fully by public money, have had their terms and conditions cut to the bone. So they get very basic wages, there is no sick pay, there is no death in service, there is no shift allowance, there is no uniform allowance, there is no help with travel to work, all of the things that we would expect where we have public service and we expect good terms and conditions. And indeed, you know, we pride ourselves in some local authorities signing up to being Scottish living wage compliant, signing up to ethical care charters, and yet the local authorities have systematically failed to look at what's going on in the care homes where they're placing our most vulnerable citizens. On top of that, we have the Care Inspectorate, who is obviously responsible for monitoring the homes, but they have very, very few enforcement powers. Very few enforcement powers. And you've seen with the HC1 care home on Skye, when they tried to take over the care home and bring it back into our control, the courts actually turned that down because HC1, with all the money that they have, were able to convince the courts that they would be able to fix all of the problems. So in terms of our care workers, we immediately identified a problem as COVID-19 started to manifest itself in the care homes, in that care staff were only being paid statutory sick pay should they need to isolate if they were showing symptoms of COVID-19. So in many cases that was resulting in them dropping from £400 to £500 a week down to £94. And as you can imagine, many of them couldn't cope with that. So what we had is people having to choose between their families and the safety of residents. So we started to hear from members who were hiding their symptoms, who were afraid to tell their employer that they felt unwell because they simply had to be at work. Not only that, because staffing was at such a bad place and there was very few staff, we actually have instances where care homes were demanding staff turned up to work unwell. So, you know, we have that combination of both. So that's been really awful. We've been talking to cleaners and cooks who are part of the care home team, who are on national minimum wage. And I want to give you an example of one lady we spoke to who is in her 60s, has a disability and works in a care home with 35 rooms in that care home. And she is responsible for cleaning all of those rooms herself, including the en-suites, including all of the public areas in that care home. And she described what an impossible task that was, and the tools that she was given to do the cleaning in that care home was a bottle of Milton fluid. That's what she was left to clean the care homes with. So you can imagine how she feels about her responsibility in terms of trying to keep the care homes clean. We then have the cooks and the care staff who said that at the start of this pandemic, there was no PPE available. Managers told them, it doesn't matter, go in and look after the residents. It really doesn't matter. You don't need the PPE, you'll be safe. Of course they weren't. The communal areas were still being used in the care homes, but they weren't being cleaned properly. Right at the beginning, care homes, in some care homes, were instructed to put residents into their rooms. which was obviously really against human rights, because not only were they quarantined in their rooms, but they weren't allowed to see their families, and families were told that they couldn't visit. Now, obviously, as the pandemic spread through the care homes, we began to hear really horrific stories of the plight of those people coming out of hospital into care homes to die. Now, these staff are not trained in palliative care, they're not trained in clinical nursing or barrier nursing. So you can imagine the pain and the suffering of these people in these care homes who've died a terrible death. And this is an awful injustice, but our members have had to live with that every day, dealing with residents that they've looked after for a very long time, and they felt really unable to help them. So there's really an awful lot going on in the sector that is really something that we have a duty, I feel, to come together to collectively address. We need to look at the terms and conditions of the members of staff that work in these care homes. We need to look at the training and clinical intervention and support that they have. You've got to remember that the government focus at the start of this pandemic was the NHS. Everything was focused around making sure the NHS could cope, making sure the NHS had everything that they needed, and the care sector was completely left in the hands of these private providers, many of whom are multi-million-pound companies who have taken the money offshore and have certainly not invested. They've just literally taken the profit. So the impact for our care homes and for our most vulnerable is something that we must examine, we must challenge, and we must make sure it never happens again. My view is that we need to take care homes back in-house. My view would be back into the health, or the umbrella of health, where they can have the proper training, the proper guidance. We can make sure we have access to nursing and all of the training and equipment that these staff need. But I cannot implore on you enough the impact on these mainly low-paid women and what this pandemic has done to them. And I do believe that there will be post-traumatic stress disorder as we go through the next few months, and sometimes that can take a year, 2 years to manifest itself. So it really is probably one of the most shocking indictments of our time, that this could happen, that this was allowed to happen, and we got ourselves into a real pickle. And I think the Scottish Government was very, very slow to react, to take until the 17th of May, when we knew people were dying, we knew the care staff were on their knees, we knew exactly what the problem was, and we did nothing. And you'll be aware that Jean Freeman, the Cabinet Secretary, did in fact step in on Sunday and on the 17th of May to offer clinical intervention, but also to say that more public money will be thrown into the care home sector to make sure that those staff that are having to self-isolate with symptoms or having test positive will be paid sick pay. And I have to say, you can sense her anger, which is shared by us, that the private care home sector had absolutely nothing to offer. Despite the crisis and despite the millions of pounds of public money that they receive, they had absolutely nothing to offer to resolve the crisis. So it really is unprecedented times. I hope that's kind of a helpful kind of summary, and I'd be very willing to discuss with you and hear your thoughts about what's actually happened here.
Thanks very much. That was really interesting in relation to what you said. Shall we bring in Sandra, and then we can go to a Q&A? Sandra, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Phil.
Right, okay. Floor's yours. How are you getting on? All right?
Cheers. Right, can everybody hear me, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm a social care worker, so I work in the community. So I thought I'll give you a wee insight into what's happening there, because everybody's talking about care homes and hospitals, and care homes quite rightly are in the spotlight because of the lack of things that are happening there. But care in the community is just as much in crisis. Social care was in crisis before the pandemic broke out. If anything, it just shines a light on the struggle we workers face every day. We have private health and social care providers who exploit their workforce and put profit before quality of care. And it's only the very dedicated and motivated workforce that make it work for very low pay, long hours, and very little recognition. Austerity meant that vital services and benefits were cut. When I started as a support worker in the community, the people I supported had weekly access to a mental health day hospital. Now they are lucky if they see a community mental health nurse once every 6 months. And it's us, the staff, who have to carry the flag. Acute mental health services have been cut so much to the bone that unless you are a danger to yourself or other people, you won't get a chance. You haven't got a chance of a hospital admission. This means that staff have to care for people in crisis with very little, if any, outside help. Increased needs, unfortunately, doesn't translate into increased hours. So staff have to deliver more care and support without getting the time to do this safely. Local authorities don't have the funds to increase care. So we already have a flawed system, and now put COVID into the mix and you have an absolute disaster. Ill-prepared services with no local or regional guidance. Priority is given to the NHS without any second thought for care or support providers. And all workers I know, whether being friends or colleagues, did their best they could in very difficult circumstances. Some even going as far as sourcing their own hand gel privately, their own PPE, and encouraging the people to stock up on groceries before the lockdown was even mentioned, and taking precautions way before we were told to do so. Visits from GP, nurses, and social workers were stopped altogether, and resulting in an increase in responsibility again for care and support workers. Now, the people we support showed an increase of symptoms. Of course they did. Anxiety, depression, and schizophrenic symptoms will increase when your normal routine doesn't exist anymore. And staff, to their absolute credit, rose to the challenge up and down the country and putting their own health and their family's health at risk every single day. In one shift, staff can see up to 20 different clients. They could go shopping, collect medication, and so are in much increased risk of catching the virus and passing it on to either the people we support or their own family. PPE, again, was hard to come by. The NHS was prioritized again, and we were forgotten about. So much so that some care providers went as far as discouraging their staff from using PPE just in case they would need it in a later date. Staff were absolutely scared and angry, but still carried on because we're looking after people, so we're emotionally involved. Self-isolating and shielding is a huge ask for someone who only receives statutory sick pay. Staff had to choose between providing for their family or for their own health and well-being. And we all know what morally is the right thing to do on this occasion, but tell this to a single mother who is the sole provider. Rent and bills still need to be paid, as does food. Some care providers have also been really not flexible with childcare issues. All of the colleagues and friends I know in the care sector don't have the benefit of a parental farm 260 miles away to help with childcare. And with lockdown starting and schools and nursery closing, most childcare provisions vanished, meaning staff had to leave their children with family so they could carry on working. Some care staff even went as far as moving into the homes they worked in to keep the residents safe. I know staff that works 3 to 4 days in a trot with a sleepover to decrease the risk of infection to their client. Care workers went from 0 in January to hero in March, and went from unskilled to essential and key, proving how very important and vital our role is to the wider society. At some point in our lives, either we ourselves or somebody we love will require care. So it is in our best interest to ensure that staff are well paid, valued and motivated. This crisis has shown that care providers who recognize trade unions and work with them fare much better than the rest. Trade union recognition, therefore, should be a huge deciding factor in the commissioning process by local authorities. Trade unions improve pay and terms and conditions for the workforce in local authorities. So the same should apply to workers who fulfill those contracts for the local authorities. I mean, some social care providers do something right some of the time, but we want all of them to do the right thing all of the time. Best case scenario, so for me, would be a national care service. We have the National Health Service, so we want a national care service where social care is provided to meet the needs of the people and not to line the pockets of private investors or hedge funds. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Sandra. Again, very interesting, and it gives a clear insight to the type of work that you do. Right. Who's first with questions? Anybody?
Phil, I've got a quick question for Sandra.
Right, on you go, Raymond.
Right, thanks. Sandra, what's the split amongst your cohort? How many are employed by a private operator? How many employed by the local authority in the social care effort?
Nationally, I have no idea.
Well, I want to be your area that you're working in.
I work for a so-called charity who gets a contract from the local authority. So we fulfill local authority contracts, but we're employed by this charity to do that without trade union recognition. I don't want to mention my employer just now, but I'll tell you in private, Raymond.
In Dundee, we've got a mix, but the majority of them are employed by the local authority. But there are some that are private operator.
Okay, all right then, Raymond.
Thanks, Phil. Cheers.
I've got a question, maybe for Deborah. I read the other day that the care homes are no longer, who are unable to admit residents because of the virus. The Scottish Government have earmarked £50 million, I think it is, for, what's the word they're using, sustainability payments. And obviously it's taxpayers' money, this £50 million. The Scottish Government have entered into an agreement with local authorities, but I assume that the benefactors of this money will be those care homes are under the umbrella or run by a local government and not the private sector, the 75% that we spoke about. I mean, it seems to me if the government are preparing to pay out this kind of money, then are they being selective in who gets it? Because what they're saying is that those in business, the employers, have got to look elsewhere, you know, to make sure, you know, that they go through everything before they even apply for this money. Am I right in making that assessment, Deborah? Could you throw any light in it?
Oh, how I wish you were wrong. Unfortunately, with if you take HC1 and some of the bigger providers, they have put themselves front and centre to get that public money. So HC1 put a letter, a very public letter out, and I mean their PR is phenomenal. So what they have said is they have predicted that deaths in their care homes are likely to continue, therefore they're going to have voids, and in order to survive as businesses they need additional money from the government. So both Westminster and Scottish governments are actually going to help these private care home providers by giving them yet more public money to cover the voids, i.e. the fact that their care homes are emptying because the residents have died. I mean, it's absolutely shocking. We're actually going to give these private providers who have the funds and the means to cope, we're going to give that money to them.
Right, Jesus Christ Almighty. That's unbelievable, isn't it?
Well, it just beggars belief, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I almost think, and you know, heaven forbid for saying this, but it's corporate manslaughter.
Yeah.
What's
yeah,
going on?
Yeah.
And yet we're going to give them more money.
Yeah.
Incredible, incredible.
Hi Phil, just like to put a point across. Hopefully it's okay if I do it. I'm just thinking on the hoof here. I've written down many notes, and I'd just like to pass on basically my heartfelt thanks to everybody that's involved, to Sandra and Deborah, and I can completely acknowledge. We've watched it in the news. It's a propaganda machine. They're telling us that the figures are going down. Yeah, because a lot of people are dying, so the figures are going down because there's hardly anyone left in the care homes. I wrongly took a newspaper to my mum and dad's. They're vehemently. I'm kind of apolitical. Sorry, you can't read backwards. The bottom line is, it basically says it was from the Sunday National of the 5th of April 2020, back when the care home thing was just developing. It was the First Minister's supports pledge after 13 care home deaths, and essentially it's a case of, it's her Burlington Court. They're going to pledge to make sure that the government supports and acknowledges the fact we're nearly 2 months down the line, and it's just gone spiraled out of control. It is a propaganda machine. They are left wanting. They want to take a long, hard look at themselves. They should actually just put themselves in the dole and give their money to the people that deserve it, which is the people that are put in that impossible position. I can't believe I've witnessed the amazing level of service, and these people do long hours. They do 15, 16-hour shifts every week of every day, or every day of every week of every year, just to make ends meet. But these people are like the salt of the earth. The commitment I witnessed firsthand, and the few bad apples that traditionally the press prey on, to try and tar everyone with the same brush. Unfortunately, that doesn't work. I've seen it, and these people deserve the utmost respect. And when we're out clapping for the NHS, it's not just the NHS. It should be the people who aren't being supported by the government. Mm-hmm. They're very, very careful to pledge their support to the NHS and the care staff. These people have been thrown to the wolves. It's just shocking. And I'd just like to say a huge thank you to, on behalf of obviously the two speakers tonight, just to pass on my personal thanks for the work that they do, because it's incredible, absolutely incredible.
Yeah, thanks for that. You mentioned yourself the question of figures. Well, I often say these things, that figures can lie and liars can figure. I don't think there's a true figure being told to the general public, and I think it's been massaged and manipulated and all the rest of it. But you're right, it's getting out of hand, and really, it's a campaigning issue whereby we need to continue to campaign to rid ourselves of the private sector in the care home sector, and talk about public ownership under public control. The question of, proper and decent terms and conditions and wages and trade union recognition and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, this has really brought the chickens home to roost, if you'll pardon the pun, in relation to what Deborah and Sandra told us, and it's absolutely outrageous that the press is not picking this up. At least some of the gutter pressers are even interested in it, if the truth is known, but that's another matter. I'm getting, anybody else wants to come in and make a point or ask a question? David Brockett.
Is that me you're calling?
Aye.
Yeah.
David Brockett, Hughie McGuinness and Arthur West are waiting to come in, Phil.
Okay, thank you. Right, David?
Yeah, I mean, for those that weren't at a previous People's Assembly meeting where I spoke, I mean, I think the trade union movement in Scotland in particular have got a lot of lessons to learn. Here's another classic situation. I mean, social care, there was an inquiry into social care which took an 18-month period from 2000, maybe 18. The paper was published in 2019. Involved was a Professor Henry Simmons and Lillian Macer of UNISON. and it's under the Fair Work Convention. And some of the stuff that the two sisters have highlighted here this evening were part of the 5 strong recommendations for the Scottish Government to action. And it's interesting, it's taken this pandemic to highlight some of the stuff that was quite, if you read the report, some 800 pages, but if you read it, some of the stuff that Debbie has kind of mentioned were highlighted in this report. But the report itself was published in February 2019, yet no action has been taken. And what has resulted, as in been highlighted in this pandemic, is the fragility of that system. But yet, here was a report under the Fair Work Convention, trade union involvement, published in February 2019, and yet we sat in it. Now, the question I've got to ask Sandra and Debbie, what was UNISON doing after that was published? Because it highlighted a lot of issues that, if it had been dealt with, perhaps the issues that we're now facing in these homes wouldn't have happened.
Okay, well, I'm happy to answer that. As a result of that report, they have set up a Fair Work in Social Care Committee, and that committee consists of an STUC seat, the government, and Scottish Care and CCPS, and a representative from COSLA. And that group is meeting regularly to look at what's contained in that report. Unfortunately, that work had to stop and take a hiatus at the beginning of the pandemic. However, they're now building the learnings from the pandemic into the work. So that committee is there, it's happening. It's not obviously happening as fast as we would like it to happen. Andy Kerr, people might remember him as the previous health minister under Labour. He's chairing that team. Certainly what we've done in UNISON is we have taken that report to every social care provider where we are recognised and we have a recognition agreement, and we are starting to work through that. But unfortunately, until we fix the commissioning and the way that money is drained away from the sector by the private care providers, it's very difficult.
I think I understand the committee is, it's like you have 18 months of an inquiry, come out with quite robust changes that were requested, were required to be kind of acted on immediately. And all the issues, as I said, it takes another committee to do it, but meanwhile back at the ranch, people are suffering. And it's a sad indictment at times that sometimes this Fair Work Convention, it's dressed up as what's going to deliver. But here we have a classic example that ordinary people who are perhaps not involved in the industry like Sandra and Debs are suddenly finding out what's actually going on in the social care sector. And there's 200,000 people working in it. And it's about time this people started pressing this Scottish Government. They say a lot of things, but they ain't delivering when it comes to the crunch.
And that's where, David, we need your help to support us in our campaign.
Yeah.
Social care and care homes are silent. The press show very little interest. We put lots of press stories out. Press aren't interested. What the government focuses on is health and obviously local government. And I think what's happened is they have now finally been exposed through the pandemic because they have to be held accountable. This was something that they knew back in 2016. They had the evidence that social care was failing. UNISON has been campaigning, doing that report, funding reports, and it has just fallen on deaf ears. And until we can get all of the trade unions to come together and organisations such as yourself, they just won't listen because these are low-paid women and they don't have a voice. This wouldn't be happening if it wasn't a mainly female workforce. And I think that's my frustration. The discrimination is still there. If this was, you know, a largely predominantly male workforce, this would never have been allowed to happen. And I think it's a really strong message in that the Scottish Government say that they want a fair Scotland, they want a just Scotland, and yet thousands and thousands of women who work in this sector, and it is abuse. It is nothing more than abuse of them. And I thought Sandra told that story really, really well, how they are low paid, but they are actually holding social care and the care homes together.
Yeah.
Can I come in just quickly, Phil?
Yeah, Sandra, yeah.
I would just like to add that the Scottish Government had the chance to ensure that social care workers get trade union recognition by the motion. I think it was put in by Monique, I think it was Neil Finlay, to ensure trade union recognition for social care workers, and it was voted down by the SNP and the Tories, and supported by the Greens and obviously Labour. So, you know, they've shown their true colours and failing us every single day for years. Thank you.
Yeah, right. Hugh, you're next.
Yeah, I thought spacebar was unmuted, obviously.
Right, bro.
Yeah, just to pick up, I was going to make just to pick up on that that last point about the equality issue. The ONS have just produced figures that the highest fatality rate amongst any occupational group across the UK is amongst female care workers. Amongst males, it's taxi drivers or cab drivers. But, you know, it is a class issue. That is the point I was originally going to make, was on the fragmentation of the care home sector. I mean, the Scottish Government have been complaining that the lack of powers to do anything is because the sector is so fragmented. Well, as we've all heard, we've known that, you know, they failed to take action, you know, over the years to address the fragmentation and the way that the private sector are abusing the finance and the management of, you know, an essential service. One of the tactics that the big operators use, for instance, is when they take over, and there's a lot of movement and ownership of various bits of the sector. When they take over bits of the sector, they remortgage the properties, and they send them into holding companies, and the holding companies rent them back to the operating companies at exorbitant rates, and you've heard, into tax havens like the Cayman Islands. So a lot of taxpayers' money is going, you know, they're working you know, a coffee house or a Manchester United syndrome. They're loading the companies with debt, which is then moved off, well, the capital is then moved offshore, and, you know, taxpayers' money is moved offshore into, you know, financing what is, you know, a sort of inflated property market. That's the way they're saying, well, we can't operate, you know, in the current financial model. You're not paying us enough.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Okay, Hugh. You know what?
Phil, can I come in there? There's Carrie Binney's wanting to come in. Carrie Binney's wanting to come in. The young woman with her hand up. And there's also a couple of questions on Facebook that when Carrie's finished, I'll maybe come in to see if anybody has the answers. Okay?
Well, Carrie.
Thanks. I've got some direct questions, but just on the back of, especially what Sandra and Deborah said, I'm 100% bang. That's one of the issues that we've been dealing with. I hear from people from the service industries, which is the private care homes, and then also work with people in social care, which does tend to have more trade union recognition. And I love that idea that it needs to be, you know, in part of the bidding process, local authorities with trade union recognition should not be giving that out to anybody that's treating their staff less. That was one of the issues I had with my members, that they were able to take what training was given and just quickly move on to another well or better paid job, should we say. We'll not say well paid, but a better paid job just because of the difference. They were directly employed by local authorities. So I think there is definitely pressure we can apply there. And as much as we're talking about nationalising it, I think professionalising the service as well. Although SSC now insist that that's done, that again is for the benefit of the employer to justify that their staff are fully trained, and those staff sometimes have to pay for that themselves. But again, it's going back to when they changed nurses into a professional service. I mean, we've probably said this at every meeting about this sector, but it really does go back to that. At first, nurses were just an aid to a doctor. Now care staff are just an aid to the NHS. So it really does need to be pushed home that that is still a part of that healthcare system. How many people do we keep out of the NHS because we are taking great care of them? If we weren't taking such great care of them, they probably wouldn't have been able to cut back all the cutbacks they've made. It just so happens now it's on our mental health, it's on our stress and strain in this sector that we work with people who are getting pushed to their limits, and we take that burden. It's funded by heartstrings, the whole sector. And as you said, Deborah, it's typically female. You know, they've got caring responsibilities of herself. I'm trying to support one member now, and this is one of the issues that I actually wanted to ask. It was about what difficulties anyone's seeing since lockdown is still going to be relaxed a little. People will be going back to work. So where a care sector maybe had a partner at home, able to watch their children, what happens now when maybe both partners in the house are back to work, grandparents are maybe 70 plus or vulnerable or shielding, who's looking after those children? So we've been trying to work with some employers to ask, can they maybe furlough some staff if they're really struggling? Can they come up with creative ways? And they've been, you know, we've given absolutely everything through this crisis, worked really hard, and when we need their help now, we're getting absolutely nothing. They have to come back to work or take unpaid leave. It's worse than SSP.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got that issue, I think, coming up, and we really need to think and be creative ourselves, what we're going to do. And then another thing I wanted to know, just I think somebody touched on it right at the start about the uplift from the government. I mean, it's fair enough they come out, Jean Freeman's letter came out, said the whole sector will get a 3.3 rise. However, I'm really struggling to get employers to see that this is applicable to them because they already pay the Scottish living wage. Now, it's great they pay the Scottish living wage. However, we still need that 3.3, and for instance, two workplaces I've got, Anne-Marie's been one of them, is only 2% they've gave a pay rise this year. So I'm looking for an extra 1.3 from them. So I suppose I'm just asking, does anybody else have any success stories or any wins with anything like that? Oh, Sandra, shake your head, no.
Can I give you some news on that? What's important to understand is that the 3.3% was miscommunicated by the press.
Right.
So the 3.3% was not a pay rise. The 3.3% was an uplift on the contract that was given to each of the providers. So if the local authorities were already giving them a 2% uplift on the contract, then the government was just topping it up by 1.3%. Now that uplift was only to pay the Scottish living wage to adult social care workers. It is not for the rest of the workforce, and neither is it for those workers working, for instance, in childcare or in children's services, I should say. Now, what's interesting is that was announced at the Easter weekend with much excitement from the government. Wasn't this brilliant? They were going to deliver the Scottish living wage for care workers. And at the moment, we are now reaching the end of May pay runs, and I can count on one hand the number of providers who will be paying Scottish living wage to those on the front line. And in fact, my phone's been ringing off the hook today because people have got their pay slips and of course they haven't got the Scottish living wage. So it's really, really important to understand that that money is being blocked and held by local authorities, which they do every year.
Yeah,
They hold
yeah.
on to the money for Scottish Living Wage, and it quite often takes us till November, December to get it into the pay packets of our members and backdated to the 1st of April. Now that's been going on for the last 4 years. I also want to touch on what Carrie said, which is really, really important. We've had the problems in care homes because of, you know, people coming out of hospital and coming into care homes with the disease. Now, the problem that we've got that Carrie makes is really important. There was a crisis in social care with staffing before this happened. And as Carrie says, as we ease lockdown, there's a number of things that are going to happen. One is a lot of these women are carers, and we know that the children are not going back until the 11th of August. And when they do go back, it's going to be blended learning. So it's likely that they will only be in school as little as 50% of the time. So, you know, our carers are going to have to provide homeschooling. But if they are not at work, let me be absolutely clear to you, they will not be paid. So there won't even be statutory sick pay. So we're going to face that problem. The other thing that worries me is many of our care workers can't afford their own car, so they have to use public transport. And obviously, as people go back to work, you've seen what happened in England as people return to work and the chaos on the public transport. It's very likely that care workers are going to be exposed at greater risk on being on public transport of contracting COVID-19, being asymptomatic and going into support very vulnerable members of our society. And I think potentially we could see almost a mirror of what's happened in care homes, in that we will see these care workers taking, obviously, COVID-19 into the homes of the people that they support. So we really do have another crisis waiting to happen on what I call the other side of social care, which is the care at home and the care in the community. So for these members, the crisis is nowhere near over. And the final point that I wanted to make is, unlike any other sector, not only will these people not be paid if they don't turn up to work, but they have to provide their own phone to come to use at work. They have to provide their own car to use if they want to take service users out. They have to pay for their own qualifications. They have to pay for their own registration. They have to pay, in some cases, for their own uniforms. And when you add that up together, the Scottish Living Wage to this care force is utterly meaningless. They're actually earning way below even the national minimum wage because of the additional costs that simply aren't funded. So this really is a much bigger crisis, not just in care homes, but in social care than any of us could actually imagine.
Thanks, Deborah. The meeting tonight is being recorded, and I think some of the, if not all of the points that's been made, both with Sandra and indeed Deborah and Carrie and others, should not be edited. Leave it as it is. Secondly, we need to take note of everything that has been said to try and use our influence with the politicians, councillors at COSLA, the question of the establishment and the money that's been held by them and not passed on in relation to the 3.3%. I mean, Jean Freeman said the other day there, and it's no consolation in my view, if we know now what was it she was talking about in mid-March? Oh, we didn't know what we know now, and if we knew it had been something different. I mean, that is just escapism, you know, in relation to no answering the question about the crisis in the care homes. I think maybe, Deborah, we could call on you if we're going to do some sort of report. I think it's vital that we do that, to circulate it to all of our affiliates, but to the wider public at large as well, and use it as a campaigning tool, you know, to make sure that that's high up on the agenda as far as the question of social care is concerned. Our ultimate aim, by the way, in my view, is public ownership and control, and rid ourselves of, you know, the private sector. And I think it was an important point that was made by Hugh in relation to, you know, the offshore accounts and all the rest of it, and, you know, about properties. So I think it's worth doing what I'm thinking about, and we need to get together and get something on paper. But I think the best way forward at the moment is to circulate the video, unless anybody's got any other ideas on how we can assist in this process. Because the ethical care charter was a fundamental piece of good work, you know, in relation to when we actually wrote it and produced it and borrowed it, if you like, from UNISON. But this has brought the chickens home to roost in relation to the actual crisis and what's going on. And I don't think the general public are aware of it, and I think we've got a duty to advise them accordingly. Anybody else want to say anything about my closing remarks there?
Yeah, Phil. The whole area is a disaster zone. It's worse than I thought it was. It's pretty bad in Dundee. And when the general public find out how their relatives are being treated with social care, whether it's in their own home or in any home, or what's happening when you get transferred to hospital, the whole thing's despicable. And I really believe that the movement should be doing something on a wider scale. We've got this report that Davey referred to earlier. We've got the government's assessments in 2016. We know the thing's a mess, and the 3.3 is just tickling the surface. We've got to go deeper than that. I really believe the movement and the unions that are involved need a unified campaign on this issue, picking up, because I reckon a lot of these lasses were in the equal pay struggle. They must have been, and that's how we link it. They've got the experience of a victory under their belt. They can go forward and win this, not just for themselves, but for the wider community and the people that require the service. What I've heard tonight is scandalous. That's the only word you can describe, scandalous. Yeah. The way they're treating workers, the way they're treating the clients is unbelievable.
Right. Okay, anybody else?
Phil, can I suggest, Sandra's coming in, but I was going to suggest, I've been taking notes. We've got the meeting taped. I think that what we have to do is take on board what Davey was saying in relation, and Davey and Raymond were saying about why has this report been lying on a shelf when there is actually a roadmap. Well, we know why it's no, because they'll only spend the money, because this has got colossal financial implications. Can I suggest that between what we've heard tonight, I pull something together, and I'll maybe talk to Debs and Sandra outside the meeting, maybe get a hold of what they were actually, you know, their notes for tonight as well, and we actually get something that we can then take elsewhere. And actually, I think there's a basis for the campaign, because I think, you know, we who are involved in the movement have heard first-person testimony tonight for the three sisters here, and I think if that was out there, I think there would be rage, there would be absolute fury about what was going on, because most folk don't know. They think, oh, they're great, their lasses are doing grand work with that, you know. And the thing is, they are, but they're getting bugger all for it, and we deserve better. And especially the likes of yourself, whose birthday it is the day. You know, you might be looking for a care home soon, and we want to get them to a standard that's acceptable for you when you move in.
Off the flags.
Thanks.
Now, can I?
Yeah, go on, Sandra.
Can I quickly come in? My other concern is that once this whole crisis is over, they're gonna screw the screws even tighter. This government is gonna absolutely screw us. And I mean, as I mentioned in my report, the mental health services are already cut so much to the bone that the people we support, some of them should be in hospital, but they can't be. So we're looking after somebody in a really bad crisis, trying to keep them safe and well enough to function with little or no resources and outside help. So if there is any more cuts, this has got a huge impact, not only on the people we support, but on the wider community and on the staff, because, you know, like what we are doing right now is incredibly difficult, but this is going to be even 10 times worse if austerity continues, or if it gets even deepened. And that's something we really need to watch as well. There's huge implications coming. I mean, for the whole of society, but for social care is under huge threat by increased austerity. Thanks, Val.
Okay. Well, look, I'm running out of charge with my phone again. Keith's suggestion, by the way, is relevant, and I think it's very useful to draw something together. I mean, if we redouble our efforts and be proactive on this issue from the People's Assembly, we could turn it into a political issue in the build-up to the elections in 21, for the Scottish Parliament, in relation to, the inactivity, the promises, and all the rest of it, and nothing's came out of it, in relation to, the Fair Work Convention and the Social Care Committee and all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, I go back, I've not got much confidence, in the government, and some say that the Scottish government's playing a blinder here. But I'll tell you this, they're not playing a blinder in relation to doing the right things, and looking after the, the vulnerable in our society as a consequence of this particular issue. As long as I'm chair, we will do our best to make sure that we redouble our efforts, to take this issue forward and bring on board people that they understand the sector, such as Deborah and indeed Sandra and others, so that we can do if you like, a kind of report that we can circulate. That's my thinking on it. But if you leave that with us, Keith and I will have some sort of discussion on how we're going to take that forward. And once we come up with a draft, we'll circulate it for approval. But those of you that work in the sector, we may need your expertise to assist with the writing of it. Are you all right with that?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, Debbie?
Yes.
Anybody else?
I think it's worthwhile just noting that Susan Galloway's just noted that the ace that Mike Russell played last week in the debate and the discussion with Neil Findlay about, trying to get trade union recognition as something used as his ace, the existence of the Fair Work Convention Care Sector Working Group. And it was an argument against Neil Findlay's amendments about sectorial pay bargaining for care workers. We need to make sure that that's not a defence for fraudulent politicians, that it's actually a working document that is actually there to improve those in the sector and not actually act as a smokescreen for folk who are not wanting to pay nothing.
Okay, right. It's 8:15. I've not been fed yet.
Is your carer not in?
Can I just say something? I think Debbie, Sandra and Carrie will probably agree. Part of the recommendations were for a collective agreement within that sector to cover everybody. And that was one of the strong recommendations. And I think we should be pinning that, Russell, right, for no accepting the Fair Work Convention report. And that's the problem. This isn't, can I just say, this isn't about anti-SNP for me. This is us as a movement should be highlighting what's happening to the most vulnerable people in society. And the people that are addressing it, what Carrie said, predominantly women. And once again, we're failing not only the people within that sector, but the workers within that sector.
Right.
So it's no anti-SNP. The SNP government should be exposed for this.
Yeah. Well, that's right. Okay. Are we ready to wrap up then?
Carrie was wanting us to come in.
Okay, Carrie.
Just one quick thing, just Davey reminded me of that, and it was something that Deborah had touched on. And I think this sector, and correct me if I'm wrong, in anybody else's experience, is notorious for not having the courage to stand up and say what they're entitled to. So for instance, what I'm trying to do just now is educate people on what it is they should actually be asking for and expecting when they see the contracts. The contracts within the private sector are diabolical. Nobody would accept them but people accept them because they think, well, this is the only work I'm going to be offered. People on 0-hour contracts for 2 years with a fixed pattern, but because it suits them, because they might have childcare, they sign up, they agree to it, they sign away, you know, sick care, everything that Deb said. But it was just something else that I think we need to focus on as well, is actually getting the courage into people to stand up.
Yeah. Well,
and I quickly come in on that as well. It's also, we as workers, we support people, we work with people, and we know if we withdraw our labor, they will suffer. So it's very difficult for us to take any action, because it's not really, well, of course we want to punish our employer, but we can't punish the people we work with because they need us. So our employer can use the emotional blackmail card by convincing us not to do anything about it.
Yeah. Well, obviously, you know, as trade unionists, you've got a formidable task to try and recruit your work colleagues in relation to those who live in fear and working for poverty wages and all the rest of it. And, you know, you don't need me to lecture you on benefits of trade unionism. But I know that's part and parcel of the ongoing campaign. If organisations such as ours see that we're trying to assist those, you know, workers in this sector, then it might give them a bit of confidence to join a union. That, you know, people, you know, such as us are campaigning on the unfairness, and we'll use whatever method we've got at our disposal in relation to what the Scottish Government should have been doing but are not doing on this particular issue. Right. Are we just about finished and just about done, everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
Well, on behalf of the people of I want to thank the speakers for coming along, both Sandra and indeed Deborah and Carrie as well, and the contributions from everybody. Keith will be in touch, but once the video has finalised, I would suggest you get it out to as many people as you can. Not just within the movement, but to the wider public in general. And that in itself maybe assist those workers that we've been speaking about in relation to the sector. So I want to thank Sandra and Deborah and everybody who made a comment for tonight. I found it very interesting, and we'll be on hand to assist as possible, and indeed Keith will be in touch as a consequence. So thanks very much. We'll make a new date for another meeting and decide who the speakers are going to be. But I think your contributions was excellent, and I'm glad you enjoyed it, because I did. I learned quite a lot. But there's one thing for sure: we need to campaign ruthlessly for public ownership and control of the care sector under the guise of the health service, because that is a fundamental core principle, that the question of people who are in our care homes should be provided with everything, and it shouldn't cost them the exorbitant price that they pay for that care to the private sector, because that's all they are interested in, is to make as much money as they can out of poor and vulnerable people. So thanks very much, everybody, and I'm signing off for the night.